OpenReview is used for something like 3,000 different venues, I think. So they really are this foundation that everything is based off of. And if they break, basically everything else breaks too. And that's what's happened. They basically broke this week, man. This is the worst possible outcome, right? It literally happened.
Speaking patterns break the code, pre-trained pod.
And welcome back to Pre-Trained Pod, where AI scientists talk shop and talk shit. I'm Pierce Freeman, AI founder based in San Francisco, where I've built and sold multiple AI startups.
Hey guys, it's Rich, and I'm a AI research fellow at the University of Cambridge.
Richard, it's great to see you. I'm sorry you're feeling a little bit under the weather.
Yeah, you can probably tell. I'm a little sniffly,
Little
a little bit
mopey.
of achoo. It's okay.
Given your cold, I'm imagining you didn't get up to a whole hell of a lot with Thanksgiving. But can you break
Alas.
down, how many people do you think in the UK take the excuse to celebrate Thanksgiving? Is it only expats, or do expats typically rope some people into the festivities?
I think they roped them in, man. There's a couple of pubs that were doing like Thanksgiving themed dinners. I think people like that there is this holiday that exists in the world. And I think British people know of it. And so there's a little bit of like a fascination with it. You know, every time I've told some British friends that we're going to do Thanksgiving, they're always like, oh, can we come? You know, that kind of vibe. What about you? How was your Thanksgiving?
Spent it with the folks. It was really nice. We invited some neighbors over, family and friends, including my
Beautiful.
pediatric doctor, who we're independently family friends with, but he was my pediatric doctor back when I was a kid. And it's just so funny, man. It's like once a doctor, I
Wow.
think especially for kids, always a doctor. So people at the table were quizzing him
Was he
about
doing some
medical
like testing on
conditions.
you?
Yeah,
Was
yeah,
he
yeah,
like tapping
totally.
your knee and stuff?
Yeah. He did the lung, inhale,
Right.
exhale,
Right.
inhale. Yeah, the knee thing. That's good. Haven't had that done in a while. Okay, Richard. Well, relatively slow news week. I feel like people are still relatively catatonic after having all the turkey. I know I am. So I figure we could talk a little bit about OpenAI's new shopping mode and then some ad rumors that are coming out based on some leaked source code. And then also a couple of new open source model releases that I think are a little interesting just from the POV of they tell us a little bit more about how SOTA architectures are trained instead of just giving us some model drop of weights and then saying have at it. And then I know that you also have some
Got a
breaking
little
news.
something I want to talk to you about. A little bit of breaking news.
So I'll kick us off here. OpenAI is making further moves into owning their consumer niche that they found thus far. They just rolled out shopping mode last week, and the rumor mill is swirling about the ads that they're going to release that are baked into ChatGPT. So up until now, there have been no ads as far as I can tell, maybe outside of some beta runs. But a huge element of ChatGPT's core business is based on the free plan of people going to ChatGPT without having paid for their monthly plan. And OpenAI is obviously trying to monetize that in some way. I'm thinking we can cover the shopping mode first. From when I've seen it being used in the demos, it's actually not activated on my team account for whatever reason, so I haven't been able to play around with it myself. But from what I've seen, you effectively toggle this thing on when you do your initial chat question, and then it will kick off a job.
I was playing around with it earlier today. I mean, it's actually not something that I like.
Okay, interesting. Tell me more.
Let me explain to you what actually happens, because you're right. So basically there is, you know how in chat, in the little search window at the bottom, you can select 1 out of 7 or 8 different modes. It'll be like deep think, web search, whatever, right?
It's like all their built-in tools, effectively.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So one of them now, if you have this activated, is this shopping mode. And when you do that, again, you could put in your normal prompt as always, but what'll happen is it'll then basically start showing you different cards with products that might be a good fit for you. And for each of these cards, you then basically have to say, hey, do I like this or do I not like this? And you do this maybe 10 or 15 times. And after that, it goes away for a couple of minutes, takes in your prompt, and then returns to you a set of recommendations that it thinks you might be interested in. So it's kind of interesting. It's like this 2-part process. I think this user experience is actually something new, and maybe something worth talking about here, because it does feel like they're playing around with this new type of interaction pattern that I hadn't seen before.
They're almost need gathering up front and then trying to kick off a deep research job on the back half to actually go online and try to figure out more of what you're looking for. What popped up in those cards? Is it photos of the products that you're talking about? Is it metadata descriptions about what you're looking for? What are you weighing in on before they actually kick off that main job?
I think it's literally just photos of the products taken from the web. So, you know, if you type in like, hey, please find me a nice coffee table. I want it to be rustic. I want it to be farm themed, whatever. Then you'll see a bunch of different products that actually exist on the internet. So it'll be, you know, like West Elm, You'll see a picture of the coffee table, and then you'll even see the price of it. And then you can choose, okay, is this nice? Is this not nice? So that's what you see. You actually see the product. I mean, this is like a real listing that they've gone out and searched somehow. And I think that's also really interesting because, I mean, somehow they have to be able to scrape this data and figure out how to display it in this compact form.
So products are hyper optimized. It's one of these categories of doing web crawling that, because the incentives have been so aligned historically from the people selling the products, they want as many consumers to find them as possible. So they actually invented a whole new schema that you can put in your header tags that's mostly geared towards these products.
Oh,
I think
really?
it's called
Huh.
this Open Schema initiative. This was really popular kind of circa like 2016, very much pre LLM, in order to try to model the web in a slightly more semantic way. But products, it's very fleshed out because it's quite useful. They also have different sub initiatives for doing blog posts, for doing person records. There are a couple of high level primitives, but one of the big ones is products. And within products, you can say, here are the images that are tied to this product. Here are the colors available. Here are the sizes. You can really try to codify a lot of this metadata into almost like these structured JSON blobs that are within the header.
That's
I
kind
think
of
in
cool.
yeah, and in large part because I think that is what Google used for Google search, then also for Google shopping, to try to index these pages, figure out what was contained within them without having to try to parse the whole
Yeah,
HTML and try to do these classifications, which was very lossy back then and is still somewhat lossy now. So the
makes
site's
sense.
basically giving up and saying, here's my metadata. Let me fork it over. Please index me.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it makes sense because they're incentivized to add good metadata so that people can find them.
I'm wondering with OpenAI's case, if that is a immediate in the moment metadata extraction that they're doing, or if that is pre-indexed, right? Because we know that OpenAI is now a huge contributor to the overall crawling of internet data. Like they have the OpenAI bots kind of on par with Google bots to try to go out and find anything on the web. I would assume that those are probably pre-cached, but it is an interesting question just based on how quickly the internet changes and how quickly products are updated and are published. If they're trying to use a live real time feed, maybe from one of their third party vendors, like they've worked with Shopify in the past, is a lot of this just coming from Shopify's API feed? Or is it stuff that actually is coming from this web index that they themselves are building up? Which I think is kind of interesting because that is, again, further pushing them in this direction of really being able to go toe to toe with Google if they're now owning the search index.
I mean, 100%. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. That would have to be a hard back end decision that they would have to make early on. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because effectively, I guess the challenge here is how do you stream in all this data in real time, parse it, and then return it to customers? Where right now it actually probably doesn't really make sense for them to do that, but it's a strategic investment in a future world where they see themselves making maybe most of their money off of ads rather than paid subscriptions. So it feels like, frankly, Google put in the early work by building out AdSense, by building out, a platform to actually be able to buy ads at an auction, building out all of these indexing tools to then basically make money off of ads successfully. You have to lay that groundwork first to then eventually be able to reap the profits of the ads. So I guess OpenAI has to like catch up somehow now.
Totally. And I think that also maybe it's just as simple as they want to convince people that you should go to OpenAI and ChatGPT for everything and not just for knowledge queries. Like if you're trying to find a recipe, I know my parents have used ChatGPT for that. If you're trying to do some travel research, you'll use ChatGPT for that. It's a lot of things where you otherwise would be interacting with some web page, which is not particularly heavy on multimedia and is just text. I think people now have a mental model of ChatGPT is really good in the consumer setting for that. I don't think it is yet the de facto place that people go in order to do any kind of search, including for products. I think for that, it's probably Amazon, Google, and maybe YouTube for product reviews, almost in that order. Maybe Shopify as well has their own hosted platform that you can use sometimes. So I wonder if part of it is by increasing the scope of ChatGPT and then teasing these early plugins, because this feels like a partial solution to me, not the whole end all be all.
But don't you think what they might be trying to do here actually though is to just get data about their customers so that they can serve more personalized ads in the future? Part of me almost feels like they don't really care if you use the shopping thing or not. They just want to be able to go to companies who might want to, buy ads and say, "Hey, look, we have all this super personalized data of our customers, we know when someone wants to buy something, come to us because we know that our customers will want to buy our products. That's what Google does so well, right? Google can charge a ton of money for these impressions because when you go on Google and you search something, chances are you're actually trying to buy something, right?
Yeah, the intent's very high.
The intent is super high, and that's why they can basically beat pretty much every other search platform. With chat right now, if you search something, honestly, probably intent's not that high, right? Like maybe I'm perusing or I'm browsing through the idea of eventually maybe buying a whatever, a DJ set, you know? I'm just curious. I'm just trying to learn more, right? Whereas on Google, I feel like when you're trying to, search a term, it's oftentimes because you are actually trying to buy something specifically.
That's interesting. You see, I actually think that the amount of data signal that you can get from a ChatGPT conversation is so much more valuable for intent discovery than Google is. The main data point that Google really collects when you're doing search results is how long do you spend on the search results page, and then what links do you click on to get off Google. And then maybe there's an instrumented pixel on that next site so they can do a little bit of discovery on that. But like for the most part, it's kind of you go to this third party site, you browse it, and then it's a binary of what pages did you see. The ChatGPT queries, because they're so back and forth, I feel like reveal so much more latent info of even just the level of fidelity that you're asking about things. If
Mm,
you're like, hey, I'm looking for a GJ deck, and it's like, okay, here's 10 different options. And you're like, okay, well, I actually like really am specifically interested in DJ sets that are production grade because I'm trying to do sets. And it's like, okay. And it's trying to recalibrate to get more specific because it's a much more natural interaction paradigm to just do follow-ups. Wouldn't that help you do targeted ads that much better?
See, but I don't think that's the user workflow. I know that's like what they pitch, right? That they're saying, hey, you can find your ideal DJ set by doing this back and forth process with chat. And I think that's what they try to sell consumers. Frankly, what I'm saying here is when I asked, ChatGPT, hey, I'm interested in buying a DJ set, what I'm asking more is, what are fundamentally the differences between DJ like sets and can they all play vinyl? And what kind of a computer would I need to actually use these things? What's the most expensive? What's the least expensive? But it's really more of an exploratory, hey, I'm interested in this topic. I just kind of want to learn a little bit more. Versus if I were to type something into Google, typically I would be typing in, DJI blah, blah, blah brand DJ set because my friend told me, hey, this is a pretty decent brand. You should look it up. I type that in, I'm taken to that website, and then I'm browsing their products. My intent to actually maybe buy one of those, for me at least, is, I don't know, 5, 10 times higher, right? Because I'm specifically searching for something. I have to know what I'm searching for with Google. Versus with chat, I'll typically use it to sort of add to my own knowledge base of some topic. But the exploratory work of trying to actually, nail what I want to find, I don't think I would ever
Mm.
actually want to use chat for it. And that's why I actually initially said that I actually don't really like this product that chat came out with here. Because for me, like part of buying something is learning about this category of goods as a whole, trying to find out where the type of thing that I want to buy fits in the greater marketplace of these types of goods. That is, I think, what is so important to me. And having someone just do that for me,
Yeah, it
especially
feels like
having
it's
AI do
taking
that for
so
me,
much of the fun
feels like
out of
it's
it.
exactly, it's taking the fun out of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I've always thought that these niche demos that companies always film, it revolves around one of two things. It's travel and it's shopping, right? It's two activities of very affluent, high wealth people who probably live in the Bay Area, New York. And it's also people specifically of the disposition that want to do those things, but not really spend time doing them. I feel like it kind of breaks down to this old Silicon Valley stereotype of the nerds that begrudgingly shop because they don't really want to, but they have to wear some clothes. I
100%.
think they would might as well just go in the nude if it were socially acceptable, but they have to wear something. So then they just want to get it done with. That's
Yeah.
why personal stylists are also so in vogue in the Bay Area too. Same kind of roots. So all of these demos are oriented around that kind of buyer persona because those are the early adopters typically of these tools. But the reality is, I feel like for the vast majority of consumers, especially around shopping, it's not only what you said, which is you're trying to build your awareness of these trends, which I think is true too. But I think it's also a very social game for other people. Like you actually want to talk to your friends about the things that you're planning on buying
100%.
on Black Friday. You
Exactly.
want to have some hot takes. And I think if you're just given the answer, you're kind of robbed of all of the learning experience about that and the ability to develop your own taste profile. I don't think most people will actually want to use something like this. I agree with you. Let me, however, paint what I think their end game is here that I actually do think is pretty interesting. I think where they're going, and I'll give them under 6 months before they roll this out, they already have the indexing. They have this user relationship that they're building. People really trust ChatGPT. I give them 6 months before they roll out a product feature where any suggested product that they give you in ChatGPT, there's a one button that you can click and it will build that to your credit card and it will be in the mail the next day.
Oh, like
Because
the
it feels
Amazon
like
thing?
that's kind of
Yeah.
that's where the puzzle pieces come together. That's where their agent and web use stuff really works and can be consumerized. That's where their indexing works. That's where all the shopping stuff. I think they're laying the seeds to get people to start trusting ChatGPT for a shopping assistant. And then they're actually going to try to do a rug pull out of Shopify and Amazon.
Maybe. I mean, I don't think you're wrong, and I could totally see them doing this too. But I think if you put yourself in Sam's shoes right now, you're spending on the order of hundreds of billions of dollars, right? You've committed to spending this much money on building these data centers. Your company right now is valued in the, hundreds of billions of dollars, but your revenue just doesn't really match it yet. Like, people are still really excited about this company because I think that they do see it being a real competitor to Google. But Google only makes this much money because of ad revenue, right? So in some sense, I think what people are expecting chat to eventually become is a real competitor to Google that can eat their lunch on ads. I think somehow Sam is trying to think, okay, well, how can I really make all of these users that currently are using my product for free effectively paid customers because they're, interacting with these ads? I actually ran some of the numbers here before we start talking. It turns out that Google, I think, makes about 6 or $7 per person per month just on ads. Imagine if OpenAI could do the same thing. Now, like, if you're a free user, sure, that's fine because we're still making 6 or $7 off you.
Mhm.
If you're also using the feature that you said, right, or this buy now feature, and they're maybe skipping some more money off of that, sure, that's even better, right? But I think the groundwork of what they're trying to do here is to say, we want to build a really powerful ad machine, something that can really parallel, if not surpass. I think that's really the play here. And shopping, I guess, is like the first tiny little step in that direction.
It's actually a very clean segue into the next topic of discussion on the OpenAI front, which is these ads that they're thinking about starting to run. The stats here are pretty mind blowing. Apparently, there are 800 million people that use ChatGPT on a weekly basis. It's like just shy of a billion, which,
That's
when you
crazy.
think about the overall amount of people who have access to the internet, it's a pretty good quantity of people. In 3 years, it's become one of these top three, top five internet sites by users. So that also means that they would be able to get $4.8 billion of revenue each month just off of ads by monetizing this 800 million consumer base, which is pretty significant. I mean, that would increase their revenue for an entire year by 50 billion, which would pay for at least a couple of data centers.
A couple of data centers for sure. I mean, the interesting thing about this whole thing is that they haven't even really been able to tap into the Chinese market because of legal reasons in the same way that Google hasn't been able to. And I wonder if chat is going to come to a different conclusion than Google on this, you know?
Mm,
Like, Google in, I don't know what it was, like 2008, maybe 2010, just decided that, hey, we're just going to pull our whole business out of China because we don't want to have to deal with, censorship effectively. It seems like in OpenAI's case, it was kind of the other way around, where OpenAI was, very happy to keep creating this product. It was really more of the Chinese government who said, "Hey, we just don't believe that we can actually have enough control over this company to make sure that they are consistent with our own internal censorship laws. So we're just not going to allow it." Right? I mean, who knows? I feel like there's a world in which OpenAI comes to different conclusion than Google and says, well, let's try to see if we can serve a Chinese friendly version of this
mm.
application, right? And now you're tapping into an additional 1 billion Chinese people. Because I actually didn't realize this, but 85, 90% of China is connected to the internet. I mean, this is like a pretty astounding stat, given that a lot of the folks also live in rural parts of
Yeah.
China, right, with
I
limited
don't even know if the
connectivity.
US is that high.
That's crazy. So 1 billion people in China with access to the internet, they use it daily. That is a crazy market, right? That is literally like an eighth of the world's population. You could imagine ChatGPT somehow being able to tap into that. That would be pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. So, and then, they increase it from $5 a month to $10 a month pretty much overnight. Can definitely
Right.
serve ads on that.
Right.
So, from what we know, basically this leak, if you even want to call it that, was just some strings that were encoded within the JavaScript front end, but they were human readable. So, these are things like com.openai.feature.ads.data, ads debug info, ad target type. So, I looked through these, and it's hard to surmise with some of these feature names because they have code names exactly what's going to do. It's also possible that they're strings for features that they're not going to release and are just beta testing. But here's my sense of things, right? I think OpenAI is going to release 2 new ad features that users are actually going to interact with, at least on the free version, if not on the paid version too, right? I think one is going to be in search results. So we were just talking about shopping, and that's effectively a search result. Like it's things that are from the open internet. It's not actually baked into the model weights. It's things that the model's actually going out and getting proactively for you, returning to you. I think in the product sense, that seems clear to me. It's going to give you some ads back. It's going to be like, this product is a sponsored suggestion, just like you kind of see on Google. I think you're also going to see that on travel recommendations. These like big ticket items that are pretty easy to sell ads against. I think those are going to appear within these same widgets that we're starting to see OpenAI roll out today within chat. It's not just text anymore. The model can return these formatted payloads that are kind of like tool calls. It's like some structured schema that's going to serialize some React view on the front end. I think they're going to continue to do that, maybe even double down on it. And then each of those widgets are going to include some sponsored results as part of the data feed within the application.
It's been interesting for them to see them, playing around with these different UI components because this isn't their first rodeo. I mean, they have different products that they've unveiled in the last 2 years that each are a wrapper around your base model, but just with a little bit additional sugar coating of UI, where now it's, hey, it's the base model, but now it's really good at being a teacher for a student. And so now the model will show you a little widget where it's trying to give you like a little quiz or something like that on the side.
I remember we talked about this 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah, exactly. So they're experimenting. I feel like they're really playing around with these different components, seeing what sticks right now. It feels like they're kind of like in an R&D phase, trying to test out what UI or UX layer they want to put on top of this chat model.
Totally. Because the model's the same. I mean, as far as we know, it's like there's an API model, there's a chat model. Pretty sure those are roughly equivalent in terms of the actual model weights. The ChatGPT one obviously has a system prompt. You've got Codex, which is its own fine-tuned model that's independent. But I think for the most part, they're just saying, okay, we're trying to productize this instead of we're just trying to train the best language model. And thankfully, models are steerable enough that it's pretty easy to tell them, here's a new tool that you haven't really seen before. Here's what you should do with it. And then use that as part of these product functionalities. So I think it's smart for them to introduce these widgets. I think, again, getting the consumer sentiment up to par of people actually expecting this is something that you're going to get back with ChatGPT probably doesn't come naturally to a lot of people right now who are expecting slightly more text results. But I think if it's contextually relevant to you, like you're already shopping, you're doing research, getting a more targeted widget that would let you consume that information in a better way, I think is solving this UX question of you can really crack the UX against these common things that people use ChatGPT for. That's both increases the user lock-in that other platforms have to spend time to replicate, as well as potentially allows you to be a little bit more opinionated to the ads that you're serving
100%.
and then selling into because you actually know what people are looking for. The one other thing that I think they're going to release based on this string called Bazaar Content Wrapper, Bazaar being, the name of an outdoor market.
You're not just saying it's weird.
I'm not just saying, it's not just completely offhand, completely bizarre, although it might be that too. I think they're probably going to get into this game of having more direct product sales relationships. I don't know exactly what that looks like. If that's something like we were talking about before with an agent is going to go out and actually buy this thing on your behalf. If it looks like a closer Shopify partnership or Amazon partnership, if it's OpenAI completely entering that arena by itself and maybe challenging Facebook and doing Facebook Marketplace, except OpenAI Marketplace. It could be one of 1,000 different things, but I do think that there is something net new there that they're probably, again, doing just so they can better sell.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really excited to see what this looks like because this is new territory. It feels to me like Google defined what ads look like for the longest time. And we have a new way of seeing that now. When Google first came out, I actually was listening to Acquired. They were talking about how people just thought that the idea of having an ad in search was morally dubious, right? Because you're trying to search for something. Why would you add something that's maybe fake to the top just because someone paid for it? It's almost like you're lying to someone, right? I want the answer. Why are you giving me this thing that someone paid you to give me? Feels kind of a little ethically questionable, right? I wonder if people are going to have that same ick factor with chat when these tools eventually, get fleshed out. If people are going to say, no, I mean, it's crazy to me that these AI models, which we're already a little bit skeptical of because they do hallucinate occasionally, not so much anymore, but they have a reputation of hallucination. If you then see an ad along with that, is that going to doubly reinforce the sense that you're kind of being lied to maybe? Or are we going to say, oh, that makes sense? I mean, this is just a search thing, so it makes sense that there would be an ad.
This is actually, I think, my biggest question on how they roll this out technically, because we know that ChatGPT has access to the data payload of these widgets, so you can interact with them in text after ChatGPT gives you them back. Basically, I'm thinking just there's some JSON blob that's effectively living in the chat history, and then ChatGPT can then back reference that like any other data payload that you give it, except on the front end, much like the markdown, it's just serialized as a widget. I'm very curious whether or not OpenAI includes the sponsored results in that payload for chat to have access to after the fact, because that I think would be the biggest pseudo security vulnerability if you let corporate actors actually specify some amount of text that's within that payload. You could potentially steer the model to recommend your product over other ones. But I mean, the converse, right, is if you don't include it in the payload and then the user asks about a sponsored result, chat actually wouldn't know that it just suggested that sponsored result because it wasn't in the payload. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
So interesting. I've never thought about that. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess
I
maybe
don't
it's a
know.
question of what fidelity they allow sponsors to provide that text, right? If it's just a product name, if it's a product name plus a description, if it's just pulled from the website as a ground truth. But it definitely gets you into some very interesting territory of how much are the models just predisposed to be steered if there's any kind of search result versus in normal search results, the person being biased to click on it is us, but it's not the
Yeah.
model. It's not
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Google being confused that it was actually
Yeah.
sponsoring something that wasn't otherwise going to appear as number one. You know that numerically. ChatGPT just might not.
You could have ads where the person buying the ad purposely and maybe injects something into the image even itself, right?
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Because you could imagine as a user, if you see an ad and you're in the chat window, you might want to say, hey, I like this ad. I just don't like the color, right? Could we find something like this in blue instead? But in order to be able to do that, you must have fed image into the model itself. And if the image then contains some little hacked, like a mask or something like that encodes something about the product that steers the model into that direction, that's no bueno, right? As we say in the
That's what we
industry.
call a no bueno
That's a
situation.
no bueno situation in the industry. That's right. So, man, it's gonna be tricky.
Yeah,
Gonna
we'll
be a lot of
see. We'll
lawsuits.
see. The defense maybe is that all of this stuff more or less could happen with open internet search anyway. So maybe sponsor things aren't that big of a deal. But yeah, it definitely does open up another gray area. I wonder if the next moral debate that we're all going to have as a society is, are we really going to allow ads in our chat GPTs? Time will have to tell.
Time will tell. Yeah.
Well, Richard, if people don't want ads in their chat GPTs or image generation models, then they might want to check out this new release from Alibaba.
Yeah. Z-Image, right?
Yeah, it's Z-Image. They ran out of letters in the alphabet. I don't know if they're planning on looping back to A or if this is just the final one. They're disbanding the research group
No, it's
after
done. Yeah.
after they've
The
dropped
research
this.
is done, dude.
But it's actually pretty good. I mean, the research they've done is certainly quite good. So we were talking about Nano Banana Pro last week, which was Google's latest release as an image model. And I feel like I was particularly geeking out about its text generation capabilities. One of the things that really surprised me with this was that it also can generate very photorealistic text that doesn't look like it has any of these ghosting artifacts attached to it. So that piqued my curiosity, was just the quality of the output. And then what further piqued my curiosity was the fact that this is a tiny model, at least in terms of image generation model goes. It's only a 6 billion parameter model, which is certainly small enough to be able to fit on the latest iPhones, right? Or to be able to sit locally on your Mac. It
Right.
didn't even really require like specialized NVIDIA hardware. They also trained it pretty efficiently. They took 314,000 H800 GPU hours, which is this China-specific chip that NVIDIA has been greenlit to export, which basically corresponds to $628,000 worth of training costs. Large for an individual, absolutely nothing for a large corporate
Nothing.
research
That's
division.
so cheap. Yeah.
Yeah, they're giving this thing away in terms of petaflops. So anyway, I think it's a relatively impressive model, but what I really liked about it is they released a full paper breaking down exactly how they did the train time regime for this. Left a couple of details to the imagination, but gave us way more details than Nano Banana did about how that training regime worked. And I thought it was interesting because half of our conversation last time was just rampant speculation as to how did we think they trained Nano Banana. And now we kind of know at least how to train a similarly SOTA model that's open and has some of this data curation. So I'm wondering if you want to walk through the high level architecture of actually what this model looks like behind the scenes, then we can go into maybe some of the takeaways.
Here's the thing, you never know if this is exactly what Nano Banana is doing, but, because there'll be, like, 5 or 10 different things that they do that might be the secret sauce. But what you can almost certainly say is that some of these things are probably also being done in Nano Banana, right? There's usually some through line, some sort of realization that multiple groups will have simultaneously that will let them all make progress seemingly all of a sudden. And that might be, for instance, because a new data set drops and everyone kind of now includes that data in their model, and that's maybe the secret sauce, right? But you never really know. So look, this is basically what I thought was most interesting about this model is that they do this flux variational auto encoding thing on image tokens, which is, and we actually had talked about this, it's a flavor of a diffusion model. It's not necessarily quite a diffusion model, but it's a flavor of the diffusion model. So if you remember, last time we talked about diffusion models, we kind of explained that the idea here is that a diffusion model takes some noise and basically learns how to map noise into an actual image. And it does this by basically taking a bunch of real images, taking those images, mapping those into noise, and then trying to reconstruct the original image from the noise, right? You do this a billion times, and eventually you get a model that, given any noise, can generate some good image from that noise, right? The idea of a flux variational autoencoder, and this has actually started coming up pretty recently, is that rather than modeling the process of going from noise to an actual image, you're almost modeling the position and the velocity of how different points should move in some two-dimensional point space to give you eventually an image, right? And actually, as I'm speaking, I remember we had actually talked about flux variational autoencoders when we were talking about a genomics model. This must have been a couple of months ago, but the idea here was that you take these little atoms almost, and then you train this flux variational autoencoder to learn how each of these atoms at each time step should move and at what speed, so that after several minutes of this decoding process, they will have moved into a position that actually resembles a folded protein.
Which is so interesting, right? Because you're literally saying the pixels are atoms in this case, and you're trying to form the molecule of the entire image. A lot more parameters in a model, or rather, should I say, a lot more pixels, like a lot more atoms that you have to consider to aggregate this whole thing. This has come out like physics modeling, like physics simulation. Used to do a lot with flux models, and now I guess they're just saying that they're actually pretty good across the board because you're kind of scattering things, reforming them, converging to the same point, which is basically just a diffusion model.
It basically is, yeah. It's a version of a diffusion model that I think is more grounded in the physics of how actually diffusion happens in the real world, right? I mean, there is diffusion in chemistry and
That's a good
physics.
point.
It's more akin to that than what we had initially called diffusion. So that's kind of interesting. The second point that I wanted to bring up is that they really focus a lot on semantic tokens. So we had talked about this also, the idea here being that when you have a model and feed it an image, it'll be processing tokens that are representative of pixels, right? So basically, it just sees a series of pixels effectively, and from that, it latently learns what the image is about. What they do here is they actually try to train a semantic image token model. So the idea is that you have some visual encoder that is actually trained to, given some set of pixels, actually generate for you some semantic embeddings that kind of explain what is going on in the image. And the cool thing with that is that once you have these semantic tokens, you can then fuse those together with the rest of the model to then infuse like extra semantic understanding in the model in some ways.
Maybe a few things that stood out to me when I was reading through this. One was just the use of existing model architectures and this model ensemble of different approaches, because they had these three different encoding techniques, right? One which was this text token stream, one which was this VAE, and then one which was these semantic token image embeddings. For both of the other ones, so you were talking about the VAE, they're just frozen models basically. Like the text one's a Qwen 3, and the other one is a Siglip 2 for the visual encoder. So they effectively leveraged existing training patterns and just used the encoder heads in order to then bring them into a new architecture to do the photo prediction, which I thought was kind of interesting because they're leveraging existing work. Why reinvent the wheel? That's relatively common in other architectures as well. If you just
Right.
need some compressed representation of text, might as well go to a SOTA text model. So they're basically just doing the same thing for these images too. The other one that I thought was interesting was the real way that they crack this code on these text captioning was they did a ton of experiments with text and they figured out that the only way to be able to do text accurately in the image was for them to OCR the images that were in their training data and
Oh,
then
right.
include all of that text explicitly within the model prompt.
So much effort to do this.
It's crazy. Yeah, totally. And like huge pre-processing pipelines that have to go through just to curating the data set that you're then going to have to train the model on. As far as I can tell from the paper, the vast majority of captions that they used to train this model were synthetically generated from video or photo transformer models. They took, a SOTA architecture, like think OpenAI's or Anthropic's, fed the images into that, and then synthetically prompted the model to output, one paragraph of description or 10
Right.
paragraphs of description, and then use that as the caption that they then fed into this architecture. So I think with the OCR thing, they found that you really need to tell the model what text it was and then where it's found in the frame in order for the model to say, okay, I now can pattern recognize this is where it is in the image. This is what you're telling me to do. And apparently that was part of the missing link in order to get really accurate generation performance.
Do you think that what's Nano Banana's doing too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe not with this OCR trick, maybe with it, but I definitely know that when you spend the thinking tokens before you generate Nano Banana images that have text, it will actually spell out the text that should be included within the image. So it seems like almost a dead giveaway that we have now just cracked the code on doing text and images because we have specified the text within the prompt that we want the image model to generate.
Are they releasing this data set? No, right? This is proprietary.
I think this
probably.
is proprietary.
Yeah, so that must be the secret sauce. There we go.
So there's one other secret sauce, actually, that I just forgot, kind of this data regime and train time regime. One of the ways that they train this model with curriculum learning was at each checkpoint or at certain stages, they would capture which data points the model was performing the worst on, and then sample from this data set embedding store more examples that looked like that thing.
You call this active learning, right?
Yeah, effectively. But I feel like active learning vis-a-vis an automated process to sample a cluster of data that's going to be relevant or to prune out data in the existing data set that might be harming performance. And then having this human in the loop layer actually critique or approve the ones that are going to be incorporated into kind of the gold master train set. But I found that to be interesting too.
Yeah, that is really cool. I mean, data is important. I think that's the story we keep hearing this year is that models that are good tend to have really good data and really good data recipes. So not surprised on that front.
Data's king. Model
Data's
architecture
king.
helps too. Flux models are pretty cool too.
Flux models, yeah. It feels like it's one of these things that's kind of hard to get your hands on,
Yeah, I know.
Like, yeah, that feels like it's almost like the folks that understand how these models work fundamentally come more from a mathematical or physics background. And that's sometimes how these things happen, It's like you'll have folks from a different type of research background, like physicists come in, develop a new type of model. It does super well. And then you don't really hear from those folks very much more. It's like their one contribution,
Yeah. They drop the insight, they connect the
Yeah.
dots, and then other people really run with it. Yeah, it is
I
true.
remember there's this one GAN model that did super well with, I think it was like a GAN Wasserstein distance. This model did super well. And it was like this physicist, I think, that suggested this idea. Don't know what happened with that. It's
Well, I
interesting.
remember this a lot for graph networks too. Like this was
Mhm.
Yuri was really about this, looking at text as just graphs and graph
Right.
relationships to one another. Because I think in some weird way, a lot of these are just lenses at looking at the same problems. It's almost like
100%.
these fields are Turing complete within themselves. So if you look at graphs in a certain way, they become text. Certainly, if you look at text in a certain way, it becomes a graph. I wonder if part of it is you just squinted a problem with slightly different prior sets, and then some of those things end up working to the new problem domain. And then
Yeah.
some of them just fail spectacularly, but we don't really think about the ones that have failed. It's just always cool when they work. Speaking of academics reviewing things in new disciplines, Richard, I feel like you have quite the mic drop moment on this show.
So I don't mean to steal your thunder here, because I think
Please.
you're doing a great job summarizing the news of the week. This was a crazy week for academia, man. And I'm talking about the bug in OpenReview. So as you know, we talked about this even a couple weeks ago. OpenReview is this platform that academics use before they publish a paper to a conference to basically review each other's papers. So the idea is if you, Pierce, you want to publish a paper to a famous conference like NeurIPS, what you have to do is you have to submit your paper to OpenReview. Your peers will anonymously review your paper. So they don't know who you are. You don't know who they are. That's called a double blind process. So they are assigned your paper. They don't know who you are. They read your paper, they review it, and then you see their review without knowing who they are. That's how it works. And so after you get those reviews, you can then submit your paper to NeurIPS. You then show NeurIPS, hey, look, this is my paper. This is what people think about it. And then NeurIPS gets to decide, do we accept Pierce into the conference or not, right? Simply how it works. OpenReview is used for something like 3,000 different venues, I think. So they really are this foundation that everything is based off of. And if they break, basically everything else breaks too. And that's what's happened. They basically broke this week, man. There was a bug in one of their APIs, which meant that anyone on the internet, literally anyone, you, me, our parents, they could go in and type in this special URL. So it would be like OpenReview / NeurIPS / profile / search, is specifically / profile / search. And if you did that and you typed in a reviewer's anonymized name, like let's say M24N, if you type that in, you would then see return to you a JSON file with that reviewer's actual name, their actual affiliation, even things like who their PhD advisor was if they entered this into the OpenReview profile.
And did this work, Rich? Because it's a one-to-one association between these anonymized names and then the actual person, or on a
100%.
Okay, so like you're Mad Penguin, and when you review things on OpenReview, you're Mad Penguin everywhere.
I'm still a goose usually, but yeah, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, so
When you're using your
I'll
alt,
be,
yeah.
and usually it's like 5 random letters, right? So I don't know who I am. And in fact, actually, so the idea is that I'm not allowed to tell you who I am. So it would actually
Yeah.
be an infringement of their policy if I were to now divulge that information.
I think that would be the
actually
least
an
of their
issue.
current problems, based on what you say.
Right, but you see what I'm saying? You
Yeah,
catch
yeah.
the drift here, right?
Totally, because then people would know. And then if they saw that Angry Penguin or like J776
Right.
reviewed their stuff, they'd be like, oh, well, I'm just going to call up Richard and he's going to give me a good review because I know him, right?
100%. So the deal here, the thing that is backing this whole system, why the system works, is because you trust that everyone is anonymized. If you're reviewing my paper and I know that you're reviewing my paper and you know that I know that you're reviewing my paper, well, then you're not going to be honest, maybe, right? Or even if you are honest, others won't think that you were honest because they know of our relationship, right? So it doesn't work if you're not double blind, right? So the one job that they had, basically, they didn't do. And this is the worst possible outcome, right? It literally happened. Before we go any further, because I want to run you through the timeline in just a second, but
Yeah.
as far as bugs go, this API endpoint bug, people were talking about like a hack, like, oh, like they got hacked somehow. But to me, it doesn't
No,
really
that's
feel like
complete bullshit.
it's not really a hack, right? I mean, is this type of a vulnerability pretty common? The exposing of public information by a certain special type of URL? And if so, I mean, how is this normally dealt with, if it is something that is very common?
I think I'll just get ahead of it and say this absolutely should never have happened. And I think any competent engineering team would have made this not happen and put all the safeguards because you have to prioritize the data that you have access to by the data that is really need to know internal. And you're going to throw every safeguard that you could possibly imagine at that set of data. Ideally, you should do it for data across the board. And the reasons why in practice that doesn't happen, but you kind of have to do a triage of what is going to fully fall down and kill our company if it gets released. In the OpenAI case, that would be the weights. and that would
Yeah.
be the data set, basically,
Right.
and maybe the architecture, but I think mostly those former two. So usually each company has a few crown jewels of these are the tables that really cannot leak. Sometimes they do. In the case of Equifax, people's social security numbers and credit histories leaking, that was really bad. And again, I maintain a competent engineering team with competent management should never get in this position. So
Yeah.
what usually happens in practice are that there are two different ways that this data usually leaks when you see these breaches that aren't hacks. This was a publicly available endpoint. This was buggy code that OpenReview shipped, right? So the option one is that it was some admin root which users weren't supposed to get access to, and they did. There was some trouble authenticating the user against the admin set that they have, and that they revealed something that admins can see, but regular people can't. I think that's possible here, right? Because I think area chairs or maybe some other people that manage the system have to know who the double blind people are in case they're debugging things. So it's possible that was the error case that they found themselves in here. The other one that's pretty common is that you have a whole payload that's part of the database. So this would be all of the different columns that you have within your table where you're defining for this given record, here are all of the different things that we have access to. Here's the first name, here's the last name, here's the social security number, the password. And you only want to serialize a certain subset of them. So you only want to give people access to the first name and the last name, even though it's in the same record as the password. That's also pretty common. And usually what happens there is you're working with some unstructured data serialization layer where you're just passing through dictionaries and then you capture the wrong thing in your SQL query and that leaks to your front end. Or there's some other process that breaks basically where you, at the very last step, typically, you want to have some gate that says these are the only data fields that this API should ever return. And if those are violated and I'm giving you as an engineer more than I've defined, either you should fail or you should just filter out those
What
data fields. That's
what
usually how it
about this
works.
whole row level security stuff that is very common in Postgres? Wouldn't that fix this too?
I think you could totally do that if you arrange your database where you're masking out these things by table as things that are really need to know. You know, like you commonly agree that
Sure.
admins should be the only ones that will ever touch this particular table that does that double blind unmasking. That actually would probably be a pretty good way to architect the system if I was thinking about it. But I don't think that's
Who
what happened
else would
here.
ever know or need to know the identity of all these people? Like that feels ridiculous. I think you're
Yeah.
right. Like that should be probably be a separate table. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like this was just a big oopsie, basically. And this is almost like amateur hour. I mean, it feels like everyone always says that when one of these things happens, but in this case, it really does feel like this is relatively trivial, right? As far as bugs go.
Let me add one more thing, which I think is why this is so egregious. It wasn't a hack. I think we kind of have to underscore that, you know, like usually the failures with row level security in Postgres are pseudo hacks, right? It's like your app will be hosted talking to a Supabase database, which works basically because Supabase is publicly available and you're just calling it via front end JavaScript. It never has to transit through your server, which is usually where you can enforce more of these application level filtering of data. That to me is a hack. If you never want this table to be exposed and you're actually not exposing it in code that you write, and someone finds out that you have an unsecured Supabase database and then figures out what table it is and then starts querying that table,
Right.
you see
Right.
that hack as well quite a bit. And I actually would put that under the category of a proper hack. And maybe this is just splitting hairs, but I feel like putting something in the wild that so easily can be resolved by a URL query is crazy. And the
Yeah.
fact that it was public for this long before they did anything about it is like that much more egregious.
This feels like one of these like things that are taught in an intro to cybersecurity class. You know, this is like the first lecture. This is like the easiest type of hack. Don't do this, right? Yeah, it's pretty egregious, frankly. Okay, so let's go through the timeline because this is the part of the show where it's kind of like a detective mystery. Okay, the day is November 11th, Beijing time. Okay, and on the 11th of November, somewhere in China, users for the first time noticed that profile data can be queried in this way. So this was, two and a half weeks ago. Actually, while I was in China, I don't know if that's a
Oh, a
coincidence or not,
coincidence?
but
I think not.
the next day, okay, so rumors kind of start spreading. I imagine some academic found out, or And then they told their friends, rumors started spreading. And the next day, a researcher, also based in China, sends a responsible disclosure email to OpenReview. So they email them, and you would think that then within a couple of days, this would have been resolved. It turns out that nothing happened for 15 days. And this is why people are upset. The period from November 12th to November 27th, when absolutely nothing happened, and folks were using this endpoint, that is the reason that this is actually such a big deal. It's because this hack was available for not just an hour or a day, but literally for weeks, right? And it gets even worse because actually this time period coincides with reviews for iClear, one of the biggest, if not actually maybe the biggest AI conference right now being due. So folks for the last, week or so, the last 2 weeks even, could actually figure out which of their papers was being reviewed by who, and vice versa. If you're a reviewer, you can look up, okay, all of these papers that are assigned to me, who are the authors? That's been going on. It's probably the worst time that this could happen, frankly. Okay, so now fast forward to November 27th, 10:09 EST. Okay. An iClear workflow chair, again, because iClear is currently happening, for the first time notices that this is actually possible, presumably gets a text message from someone or hears about this on the Chinese forums and formally reports it to OpenReview. 3 minutes later, OpenReview responds, says, oopsie, within the next, 40 minutes, they roll out a fix to the API. And by 11:10, so about 58 minutes after they first found out, they said, okay, all good. Later that day, they publicized an official statement where they explain what happened. And then they also say, and they're actually getting some flack for this, that they're going to threaten to desk reject anyone who has taken advantage of this hack and even give any violators multi-year bans, which is, I mean, a big deal. If you're basically ostracized from this community, that could put your whole career in jeopardy, right? So it's not just you're getting banned from the site. I mean, you're getting banned from the academic community.
Totally.
And if you're an academic, I mean, you're gone. That's your livelihood, right? So this is a big deal.
And the person making that decision, just to be clear, Rich, about the desk ban, is that coming from OpenReview or from these conferences?
That's a good point. I think that this was actually iClear that added that in, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Because that,
Um,
that that does seem like an overstep if OpenReview is saying, as the hosting platform of these peer review discussions, we ourselves are actually going to choose to ban researchers or ban research from submission to conference publications because they saw our leaked data. That seems like it would be an overstep to me, but yeah, with conference approval, I guess it seems intense, but that's a little bit more understandable.
it's tough because the thing that people are upset about is the fact that OpenReview was basically sitting on this knowledge for 2 weeks and did nothing, right? Even after knowing that this was an issue, and we don't even know how many other reports they got in those 2 weeks. We know of one official. There might have been even more, right?
I've got to think there were. I mean, the chances that this was so broadly known, totally. And like it's, I think filled with pretty honest people writ large. So I would be shocked if that was the first security disclosure that they got. Can you speculate why it took this workflow chair contacting OpenReview to finally get heard? Do they just have a different channel besides the traditional email address that you send these security vulnerabilities to?
Yeah, that's a great point. So basically, I should explain this. Area chairs actually are kind of a big deal. So when you submit a paper, you'll have your reviewers, your standard run-of-the-mill reviewers. And I should also say that because of this, leakage, we actually know that a lot of the folks that we're reviewing for this lot of iClear reviews were actually undergraduate and master students. But anyway, so you have your normal reviewers. These can be students, professors, other, industry academics, whatever. Those reviews get sent to an area chair that then gets to see all of those reviews paper, and then they basically make a meta decision on a final review. It's like a meta review is what it's called, where they summarize all the different reviewers and then they basically say which ideas they think are justified, which they aren't justified. Now, the area chairs, in addition to that, have the important job of effectively, finding and helping assign reviewers last minute, assign in an anonymized way, but what they do a lot oftentimes is they'll be running around trying to get, a couple extra reviews on one paper that might only have one review. And so in order to do their job effectively, they're basically talking to OpenReview all the time. They're saying, "Hey, OpenReview, please don't close this form yet. We still are waiting on 2 more reviews. They should come in today. Like, we promise they'll come in today, but just please keep this open an extra 12 hours for us." So the area chairs have a lot of power over the system. They kind of run the logistics of the show, right? So when OpenReview gets an email from one of these area chairs, they probably kind of flag that to the top, right? Or it has some priority because it does have to get assigned to someone who works at OpenReview that same day and get acted on. So it's actually not surprising that this actually bubbled up to the top of OpenReview's emails, and maybe the original email didn't from the one Chinese academic.
You could totally imagine how this happened too on some level, right? Like it was the week of Thanksgiving or it was the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving.
Right.
I'm sure whoever manages their security at openreview.net email address was probably on vacation. There was no one else checking that email address. And the person who's in contact with the area chairs, because there's such a high degree of urgency associated with those queries, is probably connected either via text or maybe just like independent email, saw that email, was working that day, and then escalated it through the chain. I mean,
100%.
you really can kind of connect the dots from the outside looking in as to probably what happened in this case. But let me tell you, I mean, as someone who's had to set up these InfoSec workflows internally, either for ISO audits or otherwise, this is one of the first things that auditors will ask about. They say, what is your internal process? Not even what are your
Oh,
security vulnerabilities? It's what is your internal process to handle a security vulnerability once you find out about it? Because there's kind of an acknowledgement that you're going to have some security vulnerability. No system that we can pen test is going to be utterly perfect from the outside.
yeah.
But if you get one of these disclosures from a white hat researcher, how fast are you to respond and remediate? And what can you do to communicate out to people? That's a workflow element of things that companies really should have dialed.
Yeah, 100%. And it feels like they had it dialed down in the case where it's the area chairs that message them, right? It's not where they just get an email to whatever support at openreview.com, right?
That kind of violates the notion of responsible disclosure in my mind. I mean, if I have a single line channel to an engineer that works at any big tech company, I mean, fantastic that I found a bug and I can hit them up. But from what I've seen, most of these responsible disclosures are usually from people that are completely unconnected to the company. It's like independent security researchers that are just poking around and find something potentially pretty severe. And the process that's supposed to be followed is, there's a triage person, immediately takes a look at this, sees if they can reproduce, then prioritizes. If it's a critical bug, they'll usually do it very rapidly and then issue a patch. If it's not, it might wait for the next feature release. And it seems like in this case, it just fully wasn't managed because I can't imagine any
100%.
kind of
Yeah.
triage process that would have resulted in them seeing this, understanding the true scope of it, and then not choosing to act on it right then and there. When they did eventually find out about it, I guess, kudos to them for fixing it quickly and then issuing these disclosures and I think doing some recon on the logs, which maybe we can talk about to see who has access to this data. They've definitely been transparent in the aftermath, but I guess the problem that people are really nitpicking is that this whole litany of workflow things has to start with getting the email, because if you don't check the email address, it doesn't actually matter how good your policy is
I mean,
afterwards.
here's the thing, and this is probably what I've seen most on Twitter, this opinion, which is the fact that folks have a lot of sympathy for OpenReview. It's not like when one of these big companies gets hacked, like Meta, where, there's so much vitriol and people feel like, "Oh, can't believe they would do this with my personal data." I mean, people are upset, don't get me wrong. OpenReview had a job and they failed at it, but OpenReview is run by one guy, and we talked about this before. This guy's name is Andrew McCallum. He's a professor at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He's been running this, I think, now for the last, maybe 5, 10 years or so. He raises something on the order of $1 million or $2 million a year to run this nonprofit organization, in addition to his day job as a professor, right? Hires, 10 or 12 people full time to do this. And that's pretty much it. I mean, the money he gets is philanthropic, doesn't charge anything for this. Anyone can use this. And so, by the way, I mean, if you and I wanted to create our own venue, our own conference, and start using OpenReview, we could do that for free. They just provide the service free of charge. And so people say, look, like It's honestly kind of sad that we all rely on the system that backs all of us, and, none of us are putting more effort into it. We're all just assuming that Andrew's just gonna keep up a good job, and keep doing this effectively for free. I mean, I don't even know if he pays himself a salary out of this. And yet, at the same time, you have, big conferences like iClear charging me, $700 to go to these conferences, and part of that is basically this, like, reviewing fee almost, right?
You
The
think
the
they could
fact that I
throw some pennies over to OpenReview, right?
Yeah, I mean, people just feel like the whole thing is kind of unfair and that, OpenReview is kind of, like, trying their best, and that some of the fault should almost be blamed on these conferences themselves, right? I mean, the conferences aren't managing OpenReview, but they're the ones that are almost, purposefully exploiting the existing OpenReview system, without actually helping them out or giving them any funding of any sort, right? I'm a little sympathetic to it. I feel like I know what you're gonna say, which is, but still, this is, they had one job, right? Like, how hard could it be to fix this patch?
I was actually going to say they have a $2 million budget a year, which is
Okay.
significantly more than I operate under for the things that I
That's true.
bootstrap.
That's true.
I
Yeah.
mean, when seen from like the budgets of a FANG company or even probably the budgets of these conferences, like 2 million is nothing. I think maybe my take is the answer here not yes and. Yes, they messed up. And yes, they should probably get more money. I think the racket that these big conferences are able to maintain just by the fact that they have monopoly power, like the monopoly of prestige of these conferences that stops additional entrants from getting in the market is something that has to be mitigated by doing something. And I think forcing them to pay at least a portion of those fees so that we know that this really integral platform is maintained, I think is a good idea independent of this breach. You know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
think those $2 million should have to come from some independent grant funding that Andrew just manages to shake loose from a tree. Like, I think they're providing a service. People should pay for that service. The main beneficiaries of that service are the conferences. The academic community too is a long tail, but it's like especially the conferences, and that's where the budgets are concentrated. So I think they should definitely pay more money. I guess my only thinking is, $2 million is a lot of money. And I do think that there is some exposure that you sign yourself up to if you agree to become a really central part of some ecosystem, regardless of how your capital stack is oriented. I think it's unfortunate that they don't get that much money, but I think they've also, in some ways, maneuvered themselves to be in the center of this whole review process in a really critical function. And I think I balk a little bit, I suppose, at seemingly how cavalier the one thing, like the sanctity of the review
Right.
process, which we all
Right.
agree is like really sacrosanct, was violated not because they didn't have budget, but just like seemingly because some process fell down during the holidays. I think that's where like I'd put a little pressure on the team to probably figure out what went wrong and to really do a proper postmortem on it. But I mean, you didn't even mention people are getting blackmailed off of
Yeah.
these leaks. You know what I mean? Like this is having some real world implications to I'm sure the blackmail is probably relatively soft. I don't imagine these academics are going out of there
Well,
saying,
they're getting bribed is more
yeah,
like
they're
it, I
they're getting
think. Yeah.
bribed.
It just puts everyone in an uncomfortable position.
Totally. I mean, so going forward, maybe let's try to be a little bit positive and prescriptive instead of just retroacting and calling from the cheap seats. What do you think they should do next? What's the biggest move? Should they rotate every academic's name that's on OpenReview? Should they institute some safeguards? Do you think they should kick people out of conferences by doing IP matching? Like, where would you go from here?
Yeah, I think you have to reassign everyone. I mean, I think what they need is just to have a better, more stable back, do a deep review of what happened. And more broadly, I think a good policy would be to maybe try to open source as much of this code as possible so that others can come in and say, hey, we can find these vulnerabilities in here. Kind of like most, companies will sometimes open source part of the software in order for them to be more able to find vulnerabilities, right? Something like that, I think would make a lot of sense in this case. Yeah, I mean, this is a big whoopsie, and it's almost crazy that this didn't happen earlier, given the fact that it seems like this might have been a bug that existed already for years, right? Who knows? So all of this and a postmortem would be good too, like a good deep dive postmortem where they actually do report, hey, how long has this bug been there? When was this introduced? How many people actually ended up seeing each other's identities, things of this nature.
I mean, look, I'm sending my thoughts out to OpenReview and certainly all the people that were affected. I mean, I think that sucks. And hopefully they can learn from it. Like they have this role. I think they're here to stay, even with this issue. Like they're so utilized. People like them. The interface is good. I think this double blind process is pretty well thought out. I appreciate how open their open source efforts are. But yeah, having, some internal auditing, having some more CI checks probably around
Yeah.
this like really critical data seems like a no-brainer to me. And then yeah, look, stuff will go wrong. I feel like that's just the truth in software. If something will go wrong, and with a Turing complete language, it certainly will. You just need to be ready on the other half of that to deal with when you receive reports and then try to handle it. So hopefully they learn and do better next time.
Hopefully this is the last big
The
leak
last
for
double
OpenReview.
blind. And in the meantime, if you see a review that was left in the past by Old Sad Penguin,
That's right. That was
he's
not
a podcast
me.
host.
Exactly.
It wasn't Richard, which leaves only one
Wasn't me.
option.
Well, thanks, Pierce. Thanks for letting me take over for a second. I know this is, your part of the show, but I feel like people have to know about this. This
Yeah.
feels like it was like such a big deal.
No, this is some breaking news that didn't even cross my desk. So I'm happy you brought it up. And since we're not doing a deep dive, we're short on time this week because everybody, I don't know if I can dime you out on the show, but Richard's defending on Friday.
That's true.
He's officially going to present in front of a board of his elders, and they're going to bestow upon him
The elder
the
statesman.
scroll. Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't know if it's a scroll of wisdom, but it's a scroll of proof of your wisdom.
Yeah, it's an overleaf of my wisdom.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And maybe the last time you're going to have to use Overleaf, the platform,
Oh, dude.
for a while. So I feel like that's reason
I
enough
hope
to
so.
celebrate.
Overleaf is dead.
Nice,
All right,
man.
buddy.
Well, hey, good luck on Friday.
I appreciate it, man. Hopefully I won't need it, but if I do, I have it now.
I don't think
Appreciate
you
that, man.
need a lick of it, but you have it anyway. And then aside from that, we'll talk Monday. Back to
All
our
right,
regular
man.
time.
We'll see you on the flip side. All right,
Later,
buddy.
man.
Bye. Should we make an advent calendar, dude?
For the
For
pre-train
the
pod.
pre-train pod?
Each little grid is a model tokenizer.
Dude, worst present ever. Can you imagine someone getting me something? I'd be so mad.
If you're like, countdown to Christmas, can't wait for the holidays to be over.
You get a tokenizer. You get a different set of pre-release Hugging Face model weight.
Yeah, exactly.
What is this? The worst present.
We actually train you a separate model for each day.
Yeah, exactly.
It does nothing but tell you what date it is. But it's really
Yeah,
hyper
exactly.
optimized.
Exactly.
Complexity is unbelievably low.